Hello, dear friends. I welcome all of you who has just joined us. Media Center Ukraine in Ukraine Forum is going on with our work. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. That is Kateryna Chuieva, Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy. We will be speaking about the crimes of Russia against Ukraine's cultural heritage. Kateryna, please, the floor is yours. Good day, dear colleagues. Well, in fact, we need to provide you with an update and to share the news and plans in the work of the ministry which we have during the recent times. First, if I'm not mistaken, since the very big briefing which took place in March, when we just had the first results about the state of the cultural heritage, we understand that unfortunately the situation is dynamically changing, but unfortunately not for the better, because as well as in the first months of this full-scale invasion, we are observing the increase of number of objects which are destroyed and the number of losses of Ukraine in this war. Rather often we are asked whether the objects of cultural heritage are the direct target for the Russian troops. It's obvious that in some of the cases we can definitely say it is like that, especially about the famous case of the museum, destroying of the museum in Skovorodinivka, named after Grigory Skovoroda of the 18th century, where Skovoroda spent his last years. As for these direct cases where we can prove it, they are not that numerous, but in fact all of the conclusions at least need to be researched. Now we just register what is taking place, but the final conclusions can be made only after the research and full investigation of all of the destroyed objects. So let's now speak about why it's so complicated. I will just follow the time, not to get away with that. So, first, I will tell you about the statistical data about the destroyed objects, and then I will tell you a couple of words about our plans. Now you can see the figure, 407 objects. 407 objects are verified as of today. Those are the objects which include both the monuments of the cultural heritage and also the cultural buildings like the musical schools or educational institutions, which can be located in the architectural monuments or in the modern buildings. But still, first we wanted to collect the data just about the heritage in the narrow way, but we understood as the information is coming about the wider circle of the objects, we'll collect all of that and then analyze. So what are we now doing? We are collecting the materials by the Ministry of Culture with the help of the employees of the ministry and all of the volunteers, the citizens who are sending information to us. We are having the list which is longer than it is reflected in our official website, but all the information has to be checked. So if the information is sent about some of the destroyed or damaged objects, or we can find it in the open sources, or we are informed by someone of the witnesses, we understand that we need to check whether this object belongs to the monuments of cultural heritage or not, and so on. And every time we need some time, and our experts need some time for that. But what we can see today, that the majority of the territory of Ukraine has been affected by those damaged objects in the majority of regions. As of today, those 13 regions are not that equal in this indicator. The figures are really much more substantial where the active combats are ongoing. We can see that the biggest number of these objects is registered in Kharkiv region or Oblast. Then we have Donetsk, then Kyiv, 76 objects, Chernihiv, 38, Luhansk, Sumy, Zaporizhia, and some of the data from some of the southern regions like Mykolaiv or Kherson, 5 in each. But as always, I still have to repeat, unfortunately, during these months, this is not the full picture, because the majority of the destroyed objects cannot be seen even physically. We understand that there are really fully damaged cities and settlements, not only cities but settlements like Mariupol or Popasna or Volnovakha, where there were historical buildings as well, some of the blocks or separate buildings, and the majority of them are ruined now. But unfortunately, we cannot definitely calculate these losses. So when we are speaking about the audit of losses in the context of the communication with with the international partners, the World Bank and other institutions, we are saying that we are providing just very preliminary figures, but we include also the territories in the potential losses, some of the territories which were ruined but where we don't have access to. So far, this tendency is still somehow in the quality of the religious buildings of different, and the recent events in Svetohirsk Lavra are well known, when the vast majority of the buildings which belong to the monastery were damaged. Some of them were new objects which have been restored during the last decade according to the ancient samples or examples, but some of the authentic buildings are damaged as well. And so unfortunately we have information which is not officially confirmed because it's hard to check it because we don't have access, but we got the information that possibly the director of Svetohirsk Historical Cultural Reserve has died, Svetlana Sharaban. They found the vehicle with the body, and unfortunately so far we can only assume, because we don't have connection with her since April, so we don't have optimistical assumptions that she could survive, because it's known that her sister died. So far, if it is confirmed, this is the first and really serious loss among our experts. We can see that the religious buildings are affected. As of today, in our statistics, we find 145 buildings, and 51 of them is in fact the monuments of city building, of history and architecture, the authentic religious buildings of different denominations. So also, out of this long list of 407 objects, we confirm the monument status for 125 objects as of the 1st of July. But again, why this picture is not full? We almost don't have access to the territory with active combats, and we don't see the archaeological heritage objects demolition. And I think that I will be speaking about that during the next months, because the research of the archaeological heritage is very complicated, because this is they have the very hard access. They are affected by the movement of the troops because of the defensive trenches by the troops, and of course you remember the fields filled with funnels because of the exploded shells. So this is also a huge problem. We are planning and to make it in order with the archaeologists and with the experts how we can research those objects and register the damage. We can see also the monuments of national and local significance and the objects of cultural heritage. 101 objects of valuable historical buildings. Those could be the whole block or historical blocks of buildings. We also have some statistics about the memorials for the historical personalities, 45, and also the natural reserves places. There have been damaged 31 buildings in different regions. We include also in this number the damage which could be inflicted in the western parts of Ukraine because of the missile strikes. If the missile or the missile fragment was dropped not far from, this building could be affected. Some of the historical parts could be in fact affected as well. We try to collect this data and to have it wholesome as it's possible, and also theaters, libraries, and other objects of valuable historical construction. When we calculate those objects, the objects of cultural heritage should be separated from the residential fund, because mostly it can also be located in the objects of cultural heritage, downtown Kharkiv and other cities. So of course it makes the methodology development more complicated. The restoration is harder as well, and if there were people in these objects, unfortunately those objects cannot be restored that quickly as the objects of the Soviet times, of the 60s, the 90s. So this is a separate challenge, because the restoration of the objects always is costly, more costly, and even longer than those processes with the modern buildings. As for the fully destroyed objects, there are some of them like that. Approximately 10 objects are fully destroyed in different oblasts or regions. And then we range by the level or severity of damage, like the windows smashed or damaged doors, up to severe damage when the substantial part of the building is damaged or destroyed. We go on collecting this statistical data at the website of the Ministry of Culture, culturalcrimes.gov.ua. The website which we're doing together with the ministry and the volunteers and the in fact the citizens who are sending information. So I may say that in several months we understand that the procedure, we understood that it will be hard, but still we can see that only in the process of work. So we need to take into consideration that for these materials to be used as evidence, for instance, in the international court, each of these objects will be checked additionally. We understood that under the conditions of war, especially in the active combat area, we don't have the opportunity to register the object properly. It's hard to be done, and partially it is connected with the accessibility, partially with the protection of private data, because as you understand, as the colleagues from the media sphere, every evidence has to be registered in some way, both photo and video, and then it has to be given. So now we are consulting with the partners from UNESCO and other institutions and from the International Criminal Court, and we will develop this procedure of detailed research to use these materials as evidence. Because during the first months of the war, we began to collect the overall picture to understand what is happening, what's the dynamics of the processes. But now we will, in fact, object by object work on those damaged buildings and other monuments. Kateryna, could you please tell, does the ministry coordinate the process of taking out of the cultural heritage from the settlements with active combats? And there are several aspects here. Unfortunately, I cannot comment on all of them openly. Well, of course, the ministry, as the executive branch authority which is responsible for the preservation of the museum fund in particular, is working on that. We're working on that since the beginning, since the end of February. This is the complicated situation, and because of the security reasons, we are not commenting on that, because any information can be impacting and can become critical from the security reasons for the people or for the collection as of today. So what do we need to take into consideration? And I already mentioned about that for multiple times, that when the country is fully in the war, when different regions can be under strike, any plans of the peaceful times, of course, need to exist, but all of them, in fact, will need a very quick re-update and response. On the one hand, when you plan evacuation and you have some of the safe territories, but on the other hand, when you wake up because of the explosions in different cities of Ukraine, as it happened on the 24th of February, and we understand that we don't have safe territories. And besides that, during the first months, everybody remembers this feeling when we don't know, truthfully, what the situation will be, whether it is safe to evacuate people or institutions or some of the valuable units, what can happen on the way, where there can be some of the breakthroughs of the Russian troops and so on. So the first months were really hard about that. That was an incredible challenge for all of the experts of the sphere, for everybody who's involved in the solution of the security issue. And as an expert and from the whole community, I would like to express my gratitude to all of those people, because without their efforts, without the work of our colleagues in the places, without the institutions, the coordination of which depended on them under the conditions in March and April, this help wouldn't be possible. So thankfully now we can come back a bit to the planned work with some restrictions, but the work is ongoing and we've done lots of conclusions out of the situation created. The processes which have started before the war especially about the normalization of some of the evacuation measures, the distribution of obligations and roles, and the workload of the authorities and the institutions. We had to re-update all of them very quickly, and I do hope that we'll be able to reach the situation to reboot our response system for emergencies, because of course during the peaceful times, people who grew in the peaceful country, they cannot imagine what they are facing during the war. And unfortunately, the experience of 2014, when what was happening there in the understanding of the majority of population was done very locally, unfortunately this experience was not fully used. We need to correct that while we have the time, which is unfortunately paid with a very high price. Thank you, colleagues. Are there any questions? Please. Microphone, please. The microphone is not working, sorry. Well, I cannot answer this question. We will publish this information as soon as it's finalized, because so far we are ongoing with the discussions. We are trying to finalize them at the beginning stage. And the problem is that we are speaking about the assessment of object by object. We don't have some standard cases where we can say that or how much the restoration of this or that object will cost. And even our attempts of the average figures, we still have to consult with the foreign colleagues to understand how it can be assessed, how this methodology is working in other countries, and they're helping us to find those factors. Unfortunately, I don't have those materials on me. They are not approved and they are not working so far. Then the question is not about the figures. Out of the verified objects, which object for the restoration will be the most complicated? Can you now assess, at least approximately, can you imagine this object? Can you speak about that? That's a nice question. In fact, we have several complicated cases, like residential blocks in the center of Kharkiv. What's the complicated character? All of the objects are hard because the majority of the ruined and destroyed objects of the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century, the objects which had never had capital restoration or repairment works. If we're speaking about the building in the center of Kharkiv, the wonderful modern style close to the regional council where the missile was dropped, or the regional library building for children in Kyiv, this building of the Museum of Ukrainian Antiquities of Vasil Tarnovsky, we were speaking about the objects which were already in the bad state. So we'll need to research it additionally, the state of the constructions, just to understand whether we can restore it, or we need to interfere substantially, just maybe to dismantle it to the foundation. So all of those object by object researches will be just beginning. We had some of the preliminary steps thanks to the international partners and the volunteers' efforts, and thanks to the support of the Ministry of Culture of Latvia, when we had the experts on 3D scanning coming here, and they researched these objects at the highest level and scanned them. We had several researches like this for some of the objects of wooden architecture in the western regions, and for this building Museum of Ukrainian Antiquities of Vasil Tarnovsky, and for some of the objects in Kharkiv. We are waiting for the results because the work on these materials and the conclusions of experts needs some time, and then we will see how serious is this first approximation to these restoration processes. What will be the picture? These objects are really in a bad state. Those are the demolition which we never saw since the World War II. Our generation does not know about such demolishing and such consequences. One more question from me. Which countries have expressed their wish to help in the restoration of our damaged historical and cultural heritage? Now we have different countries because they all have different capacities and resources and potential which they can allocate for such costly projects. We have cooperation and consultations with the experts in the expertise. When we are speaking about the consultative help, those are colleagues from different countries, totally different. If we take the countries who are included in UNESCO, those are mostly European countries. With the majority of them, we are communicating. Now we are negotiating about the support and restoration of the objects with Spain, with our Spanish partners, maybe with the partners from the Netherlands and Germany. It's just possible. It's not confirmed, so I wouldn't like to speak about that so far. But if everything is okay, then we will be able to test the restoration of those objects from A to Z. We would be happy for those partner countries to have the form of patronage, just to take the object and to fully restore it. And in this way, our Ukrainian experts could be involved, because the experience and technology sharing is an important aspect in the restoration sphere. And for us, it would be also very important as the financial support, because restoration is very costly and expensive. It's much more expensive than the new construction site. I thank you. We had Kateryna Chuieva, Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy. Thank you that you've joined us. I thank you, dear friends, and stay with us.